The collector stood in the corridor of its own ship, surrounded by the captives it had taken from a dozen worlds, facing a single human who refused to back down. Daniel could see the creature's internal conflict playing out in its jerky movements and pulsing sensors. Everything in its programming told it to continue the collection, to process the specimens and move on to the next hunting ground. But its analysis of humans created a wall of uncertainty that it could not overcome. Counselor Tin stood beside Daniel, her empathic senses fully extended as she tried to understand what the collector was experiencing. She told Daniel quietly that the creature was caught between two fundamental drives. Its purpose was to collect and eliminate, but its survival protocols warned against engaging with unpredictable threats. Humans had triggered both drives simultaneously, creating a deadlock. Daniel decided to push harder. He told the collector that it had a choice to make. It could release these captives and leave this sector, or it could try to complete its collection and spend the rest of its existence being hunted by humans. He made clear that this was not a threat, but a simple statement of fact. Humans would not forget what happened here. They would not move on and hope the collectors never returned. They would find out where the collectors came from. They would learn how to track them. And they would never stop hunting until every single collector was destroyed. The creature's sensors pulsed wildly as it processed this statement. It noted that humans were not currently capable of threatening collector vessels. Human technology was insufficient for direct confrontation. Daniel agreed that humans could not destroy the collectors today. But he reminded the creature of something important. Humans learned. They adapted. They had gone from primitive hunters throwing rocks to traveling between stars in just a few thousand years. Give humans a reason to focus their attention on a problem, and they would solve it. The collectors had just given humanity the greatest reason possible. They had tried to harvest beings under human protection. Daniel leaned closer to the collector, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. He told the creature that its species had been hunting for 17,000 years without serious opposition. That was about to change. Humans were very good at holding grudges, and they had just added the collectors to their list. The collector remained silent for nearly a minute, its internal systems working through calculations that Daniel could not imagine. When it finally spoke, its voice had changed completely. Gone was the grinding certainty of earlier. In its place was something that sounded almost like resignation. Analysis complete. Current collection event cannot be concluded successfully. Human interference has compromised operational parameters beyond acceptable limits. Retreat and reassessment are required. Daniel felt his heart skip a beat. He asked the collector to clarify what it meant by retreat. The creature responded that it would withdraw from this sector. The captives currently aboard would be released. Collection activities in human-affiliated space would be suspended indefinitely pending species threat reassessment. Counselor Tin spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of everyone who had been marked as viable that day. She told the collector that suspending activities in human space was not enough. The beings from other worlds who had been captured deserved the same protection. She asked how many more collectors were out there, hunting species who had never even heard of humans. The collector provided the number without hesitation. There were 347 active collection units operating throughout the galaxy. They had been harvesting species for thousands of years, taking what was useful and eliminating what might become threatening. The scale of it made Daniel feel sick. Thousands of years of hunting. Countless species wiped out or reduced to genetic samples in some distant archive. Grace's voice crackled through Daniel's communicator. She reported that the evacuation was complete. Everyone had made it out of the plaza safely. She asked about his status and whether the creature was cooperating. Daniel told her that they were making progress, but the conversation was not over yet. He turned back to the collector and made a demand that he knew might be impossible. He told the creature to transmit a message to every other collector in the galaxy. He wanted them to know that humans existed. He wanted them to know that humans protected other species. He wanted them to understand that any collector that harvested beings under human protection would be hunted down and destroyed. No matter how long it took, the collector's sensors focused on Daniel with intense scrutiny. It stated that such a transmission would fundamentally alter collection protocols across the entire network. It would flag humans as a quarantine-level threat and require all units to avoid human-affiliated space. Daniel nodded. That was exactly what he wanted. The collector was silent for several seconds. Then, without further argument, it raised its arm and began transmitting. Symbols flowed through the air above its device, complex patterns that Daniel could not read, but knew carried the message he had demanded. The transmission lasted for nearly a minute before finally ending. The collector lowered its arm and spoke in that new, uncertain voice. Message transmitted. Human species has been flagged as quarantine-level threat. All collection units are instructed to avoid contact with human vessels, human stations, and any species displaying human protection markers. Daniel asked what human protection markers were. The collector explained that any species traveling with humans, trading with humans, or residing in human-affiliated space would now be flagged as potentially protected. Collection activities involving such species would require extensive risk assessment and would likely be avoided entirely. The unpredictability of human responses made any contact too dangerous to justify. The holding cells around them began to open one by one. The captive beings stumbled out, confused and frightened, but alive. Counselor Tin moved among them, projecting calm and reassurance, helping them understand that they were being freed. Daniel watched as dozens of beings from dozens of worlds took their first steps toward freedom. Some of them looked at him with expressions he could not quite read, wonder and confusion and something that might have been hope. The collector began moving toward the exit of its own ship, and Daniel followed. When they reached the docking bay, Grace was waiting with a security team, their useless weapons still trained on the creature out of habit. The collector stopped before boarding its vessel and turned its sensors toward Daniel one final time. It stated that Daniel's behavior remained anomalous. It noted that he had risked his existence to protect beings he had never met. It observed that this behavior contradicted standard survival imperatives. It asked why he had done this. Daniel thought about the question for a moment. Then he gave the only answer that made sense to him. He told the collector that those people were scared. Someone had to help them. It was that simple. The collector processed this response, then spoke what might have been its final words to humanity for a long time. It stated that human simplicity masked profound complexity. It noted that human compassion created unpredictable alliance networks. It concluded that humans were the most dangerous prey the collectors had ever encountered, precisely because they refused to be prey at all. The creature boarded its ship, and moments later, the vessel detached from the station and vanished into the darkness between stars. Grace put her hand on Daniel's shoulder and asked if he was all right. Daniel watched the empty space where the ship had been and nodded slowly. He told her he was fine, but he could really use a drink. Word of what happened at Crescent 7 spread quickly through the galactic communication networks. Within days, every species in the sector knew about the collectors and about the humans who had stopped them. Trade delegations began requesting human escorts. Diplomatic missions asked for human advisors. Species that had barely acknowledged humanity's existence suddenly wanted human representatives on their stations. Daniel returned to his job, pushing cargo, but things were different now. When he walked through the corridors of the station, beings nodded to him with respect. When he delivered supplies to merchant ships, captains thanked him for more than just the delivery. Veth Sorrel came to him one day with a gift, a small piece of polished crystal from his homeworld. The Kethrani merchant told Daniel that his people had a new saying: "If you travel the stars, travel with a human. Because when a human calls you friend, even the hunters hesitate." The suspension of collection activities brought no relief to the beings trapped in the plaza. The collector remained where it stood, its sensors sweeping across the crowd in slow patterns, gathering data on everything and everyone around it. Daniel had not moved from his position near the fountain, and Grace stood beside him, both humans forming a barrier between the hunter and the rest of the terrified crowd. The Veloci children had stopped crying, but they still clung to their teacher with wide, frightened eyes. Counselor Tin approached Daniel slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. She asked him quietly what he thought the creature meant when it said the collection event was suspended. Daniel shook his head slightly. He had no idea, but suspended was better than continued. Veth Sorrel joined their small group, his compound eyes never leaving the collector. The Kethrani merchant had remembered more details from the ancient records, and what he had to share was not comforting. He explained that the collectors were not a single species, but a constructed race, created long ago by beings whose name had been lost to history. They were designed to be perfect hunters, equipped with technology far beyond anything the current galactic civilization possessed. Their purpose was simple. They traveled between stars, harvested useful genetic material from developing species, and eliminated anything that might one day become a threat to their creators. The creators themselves had vanished thousands of years ago, but the collectors continued their program mission without end. Grace asked Veth Sorrel if the records mentioned any way to stop them or drive them away. The merchant's mandibles clicked nervously. He told her that the records contained only warnings, instructions for species to hide, and hoped the collectors passed them by. No one in recorded history had ever successfully fought back against a collection event. Daniel listened to this information with growing frustration. He refused to believe that nothing could be done. The collector had hesitated when it scanned him. It had stepped backward. It had suspended its hunt. Something about humans had thrown its programming into confusion, and that meant there was a weakness somewhere in its perfect design. The collector suddenly spoke, causing everyone nearby to flinch. Data analysis complete. Human species presents a unique classification challenge. Traditional prey categories do not apply. Requesting permission for extended observation. The creature went silent again, presumably communicating with something far away. Perhaps its ship or perhaps others of its kind scattered across the galaxy. Daniel used this pause to think about what he knew. The collector selected prey based on predictability. It wanted species that would react to fear in expected ways, that would flee or freeze or submit. Humans apparently did not fit this pattern. Their response to danger was too variable, too unpredictable. Some humans ran from threats, but others fought back. Some froze in fear, but others became more focused and dangerous when afraid. The collector received whatever response it had been waiting for. Permission granted for extended observation. Collection of marked specimens will proceed during observation period. Non-human viable specimens will be transported to vessel for processing. The crowd erupted in panic. Beings began pushing toward the exits, screaming and crying as they realized the hunt was resuming. Security officers tried to maintain order, but fear had overtaken reason. The collector began moving toward the nearest marked specimen, a young Kethrani female who stood frozen in terror. Daniel stepped into the collector's path again. He told it firmly that it would not take anyone. The creature stopped and analyzed him with its sensors. It stated that he was not marked as viable. He was not subject to collection. His interference was not logical. Daniel told the collector that logic had nothing to do with it. These people were under his protection now, and he would not let them be taken. The collector tilted its head at an extreme angle, processing this declaration. It noted that the human was smaller than most species present. It observed that the human possessed no visible weapons. It calculated that the human could not physically prevent collection activities. Yet the human continued to interfere. This behavior required analysis. Grace had moved through the chaos to reach the security command station. She was coordinating evacuation efforts, trying to get as many people as possible out of the plaza through secondary routes. But the collector stood between the crowd and the main exits, and its ship blocked the primary docking bays. There was nowhere to run that the creature could not reach. Counselor 10 approached the collector directly, drawing on every bit of diplomatic skill she possessed. She projected feelings of calm and reason, trying to establish some form of communication beyond the creature's mechanical responses. She asked it why its kind harvested other species. She wanted to understand the purpose behind such terrible actions. The collector turned its sensors toward her, and for a moment, Tin thought she felt something like curiosity emanating from it. Harvesting ensures survival, the creature explained. Useful genetic material is preserved and integrated. Species that might become threats are eliminated before they develop sufficient technology. The universe is made safer and more efficient. This has been the purpose for 17,000 standard years. Tin asked, who decided which species were threats and which were useful. The collector responded without hesitation. Threat assessment is calculated based on multiple factors: aggression potential, technological development rate, expansion tendencies, unpredictability indices. Species exceeding threshold values are classified as threats and scheduled for elimination. Daniel stepped closer, drawing the collector's attention back to himself. He asked what the threat assessment was for humans. The creature's sensors pulsed rapidly, and its voice carried that strange uncertainty again. Human threat assessment is currently undefined. Multiple parameters exceed measurement scales. Species displays contradictory characteristics. Aggressive but also protective. Technologically developing but not following standard progression patterns. Highly social but also capable of extreme individual action. The collector paused, its internal systems clearly struggling with the calculations. It continued by saying that human unpredictability index was the highest ever recorded. Standard elimination protocols could not be applied because outcome probability could not be calculated. Human behavior did not follow logical patterns. Humans protected species not their own. Humans formed bonds with potential competitors. Humans pursued enemies across time spans exceeding individual lifespans. Daniel felt a strange pride swelling in his chest. Humanity's chaotic nature, the same trait that often caused problems on Earth, was exactly what made them incomprehensible to this perfect hunter. The collector could not predict what humans would do because humans themselves often did not know what they would do until the moment came to act. Grace returned to the group, her expression grim but determined. She told Daniel quietly that evacuation was proceeding but too slowly. The collector could catch anyone it wanted if it decided to act. They needed to keep it talking, keep it confused until more people could escape. Daniel nodded and turned back to the creature. He told it that if it wanted to understand humans, it should understand one thing above all else. Humans did not abandon each other. They did not leave the weak behind. When someone threatened people under human protection, those humans became very dangerous. Not because they were strong or fast or well-armed, but because they simply did not stop. The collector processed this statement and responded with what might have been a question. Define the parameters of human protection. Which species fall under this classification? Daniel smiled grimly. He told the collector that everyone on this station was under human protection now. Every single being in the plaza. The children by the fountain. The merchants in the corridors. The diplomats in the conference rooms. All of them. The collector stood perfectly still for nearly 30 seconds, its sensors pulsing in complex patterns. When it spoke again, its voice had changed, becoming almost cautious. This declaration is noted. Analysis of implications is ongoing. Collection activities remain suspended pending full evaluation. Human presence creates unacceptable uncertainty in outcome calculations. Daniel held his position, his eyes never leaving the collector's blank face. The hunter had hesitated twice now. That was progress. The standoff in the plaza continued as minutes stretched into an hour. The collector remained motionless, its sensors occasionally sweeping across the crowd, but no longer advancing toward marked specimens. Grace had managed to evacuate nearly half of the beings trapped in the plaza through secondary corridors, but the rest were too close to the collector to move without drawing its attention. Daniel stayed in his position, exhaustion beginning to pull at his muscles, but his determination unchanged. Counselor Tin had been using her empathic abilities to monitor the collector's emotional state throughout the confrontation. She approached Daniel and Grace with new information. The creature was experiencing something she could only describe as conflict. Its programming demanded that it continue the collection, but its analysis of humans created so much uncertainty that it could not calculate safe parameters for action. Veth Sarl had been studying the collector's ship through the station's external cameras. He told the group that the vessel's systems were active but not preparing for departure. More importantly, he had detected life signs inside the ship, dozens of them representing multiple species. The collector had already completed hunts on other worlds before arriving at Crescent 7. There were captives aboard that vessel, beings who would be processed and eliminated if the collector was allowed to leave. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. Saving the people on this station was not enough. Those captives needed help too, and there was only one way to reach them. He told Grace that he was going to board the collector's ship. She started to object, but he cut her off. The creature was focused on him as the primary anomaly. If he moved toward the ship, it would follow him, and that would give the remaining people in the plaza a chance to escape. Grace argued that he would be walking into the heart of the enemy's territory with no weapons and no backup. Daniel reminded her that he had no weapons now, and the collector had still not attacked him. Whatever was preventing the creature from treating him as prey would hopefully continue to protect him on the ship. Grace wanted to go with him, but Daniel refused. He needed her here to finish the evacuation and to organize any response if things went wrong. She was the ranking security officer. These people needed her more than he did. Counselor Tin offered to accompany Daniel. Her empathic abilities might help them understand the collector better, and she could sense danger before it became visible. Daniel hesitated but eventually agreed. 2 humans might have been too much for the collector's calculations to handle, but a human and a Veloci might provide interesting new data. Daniel began walking toward the docking bay where the collector's ship waited. As he expected, the creature immediately turned and followed him, its long legs covering the distance with smooth mechanical precision. The remaining people in the plaza watched in stunned silence as the human led the hunter away from them. Grace began shouting orders, directing the evacuation with renewed urgency. They had minutes at most before the collector might change its mind and return. Daniel reached the docking bay with the collector close behind him and Counselor Tin hurrying to keep up with her shorter legs. The ship loomed before them, its organic surface pulsing with faint bioluminescence. An entrance opened as they approached, and Daniel did not allow himself to hesitate. He walked straight into the vessel. The interior was unlike anything he had expected. The walls were covered in the same organic material as the exterior, and the air carried a strange scent that was neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Dim lighting came from panels embedded in the ceiling, casting everything in shades of amber and red. The collector entered behind them, and Tin gasped softly as she felt the emotional weight of the ship pressing against her senses. Pain, she whispered. There was so much pain here, echoes of fear and suffering from countless beings who had passed through these corridors. Daniel steeled himself and continued forward. He found the holding cells quickly enough. They lined a long corridor near the center of the ship, each one containing beings from different worlds. Some were species Daniel recognized from the station. Others were completely unfamiliar. All of them looked exhausted and terrified. The collector observed as Daniel moved from cell to cell, studying each captive. It stated that these specimens were already marked and scheduled for processing. They were not subject to the current collection suspension. Daniel turned to face the creature. He told it that these beings were now under human protection too, just like everyone on the station. The collector's sensors pulsed rapidly. It noted that these specimens were collected from other worlds. They had no prior connection to humans. They did not fall within logical protection parameters. Daniel explained something about humans that the collector's database apparently did not contain. Humans did not need prior connections to protect someone. They did not need logical reasons. When humans saw beings in trouble, they helped. That was simply how humans were built. The collector processed this information for several seconds. It then asked Daniel to define the mechanism by which humans selected protection targets. What criteria were used? What calculations were performed? Daniel laughed, surprising himself with the sound. He told the creature that there were no calculations. Humans just felt it. They saw someone scared or hurt or in danger, and something inside them demanded action. It was not logical. It was not efficient. It was just human. Counselor Tin added her own observation. She told the collector that what Daniel described was called empathy, the ability to feel what others felt and to respond to that feeling. Many species possessed empathy to some degree, but humans seemed to experience it with unusual intensity and across unusual boundaries. The collector stood motionless for a long time, processing this data. Finally, it spoke with that grinding voice that now carried unmistakable uncertainty. Empathy is a known phenomenon. It typically operates within species boundaries or closely related social groups. Human empathy extending to unrelated species and unknown individuals represents a significant deviation from standard models. This deviation creates unpredictable protection responses. Unpredictable protection responses create unacceptable risk factors for collection activities. Daniel pressed his advantage. He told the collector that if it tried to take these captives, humans would come after it. Not just him. Not just the humans on this station. Once word spread about what happened here, humans throughout the galaxy would consider the collector's enemies. They would hunt them. They would track them across sectors and decades. They would never stop. The collector accessed its database again, and Daniel saw new symbols appearing above its scanning device. Human persistence hunting behavior confirmed in historical records. Human revenge behavior confirmed across multiple incidents. Human tracking capabilities exceed standard prey species by significant margins. Daniel nodded. He told the creature that humans had evolved as persistence hunters on their home world. Their ancestors had chased prey across vast distances for days at a time, never stopping, never giving up until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. That instinct was still part of human nature. When humans decided something was prey, they pursued it relentlessly. The collector's posture shifted. Its movements became more careful, more guarded. For the first time, Daniel realized that the creature was not just confused anymore. It was worried. Counselor Tin sensed the change too. The emotions she felt from the collector had shifted from uncertainty to something darker. She quietly told Daniel that the creature was reassessing its position. It was beginning to understand that it had made a serious error by coming to a station with humans present. The collector confirmed her observation by speaking aloud. Probability calculations updated. Current situation presents unacceptable risk levels. Engaging humans in conflict produces unpredictable outcomes. Historical data indicates human persistence exceeds collector operational parameters. This unit has potentially initiated a pursuit scenario that cannot be concluded favorably. Daniel felt a fierce satisfaction. The perfect hunter had finally realized that it was facing something it could not handle, not because humans were stronger or more advanced, but because humans simply did not behave like prey. The collector stood motionless for several seconds, its sensors fixed on Daniel. The symbols above its scanning device continued to shift and rearrange themselves in patterns that seemed to make no sense. Every being in the plaza held their breath, watching the standoff between the human and the hunter. Daniel kept his position, his heart pounding in his chest, but his feet planted firmly on the floor. He did not know why he had stepped forward. He only knew that he could not stand by and watch children be marked as prey. The collector's head tilted again, and for the first time since entering the station, it spoke more than a single word. Anomaly detected. Initiating secondary analysis. The scanning beam intensified, washing over Daniel with light that felt warm against his skin. He forced himself to remain still, meeting the blank face of the collector with steady eyes. Behind him, he could hear the young Veloci children whimpering softly, and he focused on that sound to keep himself grounded. These children needed someone to stand between them and this creature, and right now, that someone was him. Grace had moved quietly through the crowd, positioning security officers at key points around the plaza. She knew their weapons were useless, but she also knew that doing nothing was not an option. If this creature decided to attack, they would fight anyway. That was simply what humans did. The secondary scan ended, and the collector's posture changed. It straightened to its full height, looming over Daniel like a tower of metal and flesh. The symbols above its device had finally stabilized, but they glowed an amber color that Daniel had not seen during any other scan. The collector spoke again, its grinding voice filling the silent plaza. Classification unclear. Subject displays contradictory biological markers. Initiating database query. Daniel did not understand what that meant, but he noticed that the collector had not marked him as viable. It had not marked him as anything at all. The creature seemed genuinely confused by what its sensors were telling it. And that confusion was buying time for the people trapped in the plaza. Vethsarl crept closer to Grace, his forearms wrapped around his body in a gesture of fear. He whispered to her that in all the ancient records, he had never read of a collector showing hesitation. These creatures were perfect hunters, designed or evolved to identify and harvest prey with absolute efficiency. They did not pause. They did not question. They simply collected. Yet this one had stopped completely when faced with a single human. Grace nodded slowly, her mind racing through possibilities. She asked Vethsarl what the record said about how the collectors chose their prey. The Kethrani merchant explained that they selected species based on predictability. Creatures that responded to fear in expected ways, that fled when threatened, that froze when cornered. The collectors wanted prey that would not fight back in unexpected ways. The database query completed, and new symbols appeared above the collector's device. Daniel watched as the creature processed this information, its head moving in small, jerky motions. When it spoke again, its voice carried something that almost sounded like uncertainty. Species identified as human. Origin world classified as Category 9 Death Planet. Extreme environmental variance. Extreme biological adaptability. Daniel had heard humans called Deathworlders before. Other species were often amazed that humanity had survived on Earth, a planet with extreme temperatures, natural disasters, predators, diseases, and countless other dangers. Most intelligent species evolved on much gentler worlds. Humans had clawed their way to dominance on a planet that seemed determined to kill them. The collector continued its recitation, and Daniel realized it was reading from some kind of galactic database. Humans display persistence hunting behavior. Humans display pack bonding across species boundaries. Humans display revenge-seeking behavior extending multiple generations. Humans display anomalous fear response. Do not classify as standard prey category. The creature paused, and its sensors pulsed rapidly. Warning flag present in database. Species flagged by previous collector units. Encounters resulted in vessel losses. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. Other collectors had encountered humans before, and apparently those encounters had not gone well for the hunters. The creature before him was accessing records of what happened when its kind tried to harvest humans, and whatever those records contained was giving it pause. Counselor 10 had been watching carefully, using her empathic abilities to read what she could from the collector's emotional state. She moved closer to Grace and Daniel, her voice barely above a whisper. She told them that she could sense something from the creature, faint but present. It was not fear exactly, but something close. Uncertainty. Caution. The collector had encountered something outside its experience, and it did not know how to proceed. Daniel turned his attention back to the collector, which had finished processing the database information and was now studying him with renewed intensity. He decided to take a risk and spoke directly to the creature. He asked it what it wanted from this station. The collector did not respond immediately. Its sensors focused on Daniel's face, his posture, his hands. It seemed to be analyzing every aspect of his behavior, searching for something that would help it understand this anomaly standing before it. Finally, it answered in that grinding metallic voice. Purpose is collection. Viable specimens are transported for processing. Resources are extracted for species continuation. Daniel asked what kind of resources. The collector tilted its head again. Biological resources. Genetic material. Useful adaptations are integrated. Species are archived and discontinued. A cold horror spread through the plaza as beings realized what the collector meant. It was not simply hunting for food or sport. It was harvesting entire species, taking what it found useful, and then eliminating the rest. Grace stepped forward to stand beside Daniel, her jaw set with determination. She told the collector that it would not be taking anyone from this station. The creature turned its sensors toward her and began a scan, but stopped almost immediately. Second human detected. Same classification applies. Grace met the collector's blank face without flinching. She told it that there were dozens of humans on this station, and hundreds more on ships throughout the sector. If the collector harmed anyone here, every single one of those humans would come looking for it. The collector processed this statement for several seconds. Its posture shifted slightly, and Daniel could have sworn he saw something like hesitation in its movements. The creature turned back to Daniel and spoke again. You do not flee. You do not submit. You position yourself between hunters and prey that are not your species. This behavior is not logical for self-preservation. Daniel shrugged slightly, keeping his eyes on the collector. He told it that humans did not only protect their own kind. When someone needed help, humans helped. It was that simple. The collector's sensors pulsed rapidly, processing this information. It stood completely still for nearly a minute, its internal systems working through calculations that Daniel could not imagine. When it finally spoke, its voice had changed somehow, becoming less certain than before. You are not prey. You are something else. Query requires additional data. This collection event is suspended pending analysis. Daniel Cole had worked on Orbital Station Crescent 7 for 3 years. He knew every corridor, every docking bay, and every species that passed through its massive trading halls. As a cargo specialist, he spent his days moving supplies between ships and warehouses, talking to merchants from dozens of different worlds. It was honest work, and he liked it. The station floated in neutral space, far from any single government's control, which made it perfect for trade and diplomacy. Today was supposed to be special. Representatives from 12 different species had gathered for a summit to discuss shipping lane disputes. The halls were crowded with beings of every shape and size, and the air buzzed with dozens of languages being translated through portable devices. Daniel pushed his cargo loader through the main plaza, weaving between groups of diplomats and merchants. He nodded to a Kethrani trader named Vethsorel, a tall insectoid being with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the station lights like polished gems. Vethsorel raised one of his arms in greeting, his mandibles clicking in what Daniel had learned to recognize as a friendly gesture. Near the central fountain, a small group of Veloci diplomats huddled together. They were amphibian creatures, barely reaching Daniel's waist, with smooth blue skin and large dark eyes. Their leader, Counselor Tin, was known throughout the sector for her ability to sense emotions and find peaceful solutions to conflicts. She caught Daniel's eye and offered a small bow, which he returned with a smile. Lieutenant Grace Perry stood near the security station, her eyes scanning the crowd with practiced attention. She wore the standard gray uniform of station security, and her brown hair was pulled back in a practical bun. Daniel had known Grace for 2 years now. She was tough, smart, and genuinely cared about keeping everyone on the station safe. He changed his path to pass by her position. Grace noticed him approaching and allowed herself a small smile. She asked him if he was still hauling boxes while history was being made in the conference rooms above them. Daniel shrugged and told her that someone had to keep the station running, while the diplomats argued about who owned which piece of empty space. Grace laughed softly, but her expression changed suddenly. Her hand moved to the communicator on her belt. The station's alarm system activated without warning. Red lights began flashing along the walls, and a computerized voice announced an unauthorized vessel approaching Docking Bay 7. Grace immediately began issuing orders through her communicator, directing security teams toward the bay. Daniel stopped his cargo loader and looked around. The diplomats and merchants in the plaza had frozen in place, their conversations cut short by confusion and fear. Vethsorel's compound eyes rotated toward the nearest display screen, which showed the external camera feeds. A ship had appeared from nowhere, massive and dark, shaped like nothing Daniel had ever seen. It looked organic somehow, as if it had been grown rather than built. Its surface was covered in patterns that seemed to shift and move even as he watched. The ship ignored all communication attempts and docked at Bay 7 without permission. Station security rushed toward the bay, but before they could establish a perimeter, the ship's entrance opened. A single figure emerged and began walking through the corridors toward the main plaza. Security officers tried to stop it, but their weapons had no effect. The figure moved through them like water flowing around stones, not attacking but simply continuing forward as if they did not exist. Reports came flooding through the communication channels. Grace listened with growing horror as her officers described what they were seeing. The figure was tall, perhaps 8 feet in height, and appeared to be part machine and part living tissue. Its body was covered in dark metallic plating that seemed fused with pale gray flesh. Its face, if it could be called that, was a smooth surface with no eyes or mouth, only a series of sensors that glowed with faint red light. The figure entered the main plaza and silence fell over the crowd. Hundreds of beings from dozens of species stood frozen, watching as the creature walked among them. It stopped near a group of Kethrani merchants and raised its arm. A device embedded in its flesh began to glow, and a beam of light passed over the nearest Kethrani. Symbols appeared in the air above the device, floating in red light. The creature studied these symbols for a moment. then spoke a single word in a voice that sounded like metal grinding against stone. Viable. The Kethrani. Merchant collapsed in terror as the creature moved to the next being. It repeated this process again and again, scanning members of different species and declaring them viable or unsuitable. Vethsarl grabbed Daniel's arm with two of his hands, his grip trembling. The merchant whispered that he knew what this creature was. Ancient Kethrani records spoke of beings called collectors, hunters who traveled between stars, harvesting species for purposes unknown. The records were thousands of years old, and most considered them myths. But Vethsarl had seen images in those old texts, and this creature matched them perfectly. The collectors had not been seen in living memory because they chose their hunting grounds carefully, appearing only where prey was plentiful and resistance was minimal. Daniel watched as the collector scanned a Veloci diplomat and marked her as viable. The small amphibian female began to cry, her large eyes filled with tears. Counselor Tin rushed forward, placing herself between the collector and her colleague. She attempted to communicate, projecting feelings of peace and a desire for understanding. The collector did not respond. It simply scanned Tin as well and marked her viable before moving on. Grace appeared at Daniel's side, her face pale but determined. She told him quietly that their weapons were useless against the creature's armor. Station security was evacuating people through the secondary corridors, but the collector was between them and the main exits. Daniel looked around the plaza at the terrified faces surrounding him. Kethrani, Veloci, and half a dozen other species huddled together, all of them waiting to learn if they would be marked as prey. Near the fountain, a group of young Veloci children clung to their teacher, an elderly female who was trying to keep them calm despite her own fear. The collector finished scanning a cluster of tall, willowy beings called the Sethrani and turned toward the fountain. Its sensors focused on the children. Daniel did not make a conscious decision to move. His body simply acted before his mind could catch up. He stepped forward, placing himself directly in the collector's path, standing between the creature and the frightened children. The collector stopped. Its head tilted slightly to one side, the sensors on its face pulsing with brighter light. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The plaza had gone completely silent. Every being in the crowd watched as the small human stood before the massive hunter, offering no weapons, no threats, just his presence. The collector raised its scanning arm and pointed it at Daniel. The beam of light washed over him, and symbols began to appear above the device. But something was different this time. The symbols flickered and changed, rearranging themselves again and again. The scan continued far longer than it had for any other species. The collector's head tilted to the other side, then back again. Its movements became jerky and uncertain. Then the impossible happened. The collector took one step backward,